I have noticed that people have been using the email system, so good job. So good to see that that's actually getting some good use. So tonight, flipping into first person speak. Welcome to my world. An experience and environment outside of the ordinary and far removed from daily life experiences. Although I'm a photographer of many genres, including landscape, event, concert, and architecture, my photographic passion rests within the classification of urban exploration, also known as abandoned site exploration. I was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and reside in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan bounds of Arlington, Virginia. In 2009, music was the catalyst that prompted a reawakening of my photography journey. For more than 4 years, I interviewed musicians, wrote articles, and photographed concerts for a music magazine. In 2012, I had a visceral reaction to an urban exploration photograph of an abandoned asylum that caused an immediate shift in the motion of my photographic endeavors. My love of history, research, and writing complement my urban exploration photography track. I am the author and photographer of 13 books, 9 completed, I think that has now been changed, about urban exploration, published by Font Hill Media. Several of my images, especially my urban exploration works, were recipients of the prestigious photography awards, along with my works featured at gallery exhibitions in New York City, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Paris, France's Louvre Museum. Would the real Cindy Vasko please speak up?
You're muted, Cindy.
Okay, I'm on now. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a delight to be virtually here. And thank you for having me talk about my crazy world of urban exploration. I've been doing it since 2012. And since the average age of an urban explorer is in their 20s and 30s, and usually male, I'm definitely the statistical outlier in this Venn diagram. But I'll keep doing it until I'm unable to run, although that's getting closer and closer to a reality. It's getting harder each year. So let me open up my presentation and
I'm gonna actually make you the host officially. So
okay.
You might have to accept it. Oh, I think it just let you.
All right.
And then you can share now. So
okay, I'm the host now. Let me open up this and share it. Share screen. Advance. Slideshow.
Man, I was scanning through the list of attendees and I saw George Carlin in the list.
Does everybody see this?
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, I'm at the wrong image here.
It's gorgeous.
See the first slide?
Yes.
You don't see a strip of images, correct?
Nope.
You just see one slide, correct?
Just slide, yes.
Great.
You're good.
All right. All right. Urban exploration is, or urbex or UE is pretty self-explanatory, and it's evolved into a community of those who like to explore and photograph abandoned man-made structures that are often off limits to the general public. Urbexers differentiate from tourists who visit ruins of the distant past and unfamiliar past, in that urban explorers view the beginnings of often planned contemporary decay. An urban explorer wants to document an association with the recent past and reveal a history not yet removed by demolition or nature's forces. Abandonments are therefore, they're statements about time, nature, mortality, and divestiture, and they remind us all that ultimately all will be gone. It's very depressing, isn't it? But abandoned structures provide so many opportunities for interesting photo compositions, but this isn't for everyone. This genre is very aggressive. It's often difficult to execute, and it's often misunderstood, especially when you're confronted by security personnel. This is one of the 2 photography genres, though, that gets my blood pumping, and one that will get me out of bed at 3 a.m. and get on the road for a long drive to just one abandonment. This is a hospital scene, and seeing an abandoned setting for the first time can be so dramatic as this one was. This was the first scene I saw when I entered this hospital. The frequent dynamic ranges of light appeal to a photographer in general, but there's also this emotional element, the sadness and the waste, about abandonment, statements about our throwaway society. There are so many sensations outside of an ordinary environment that are experienced when layers of history within such skeletal remains are exposed. And here's an industrial shot where it's a former power plant and it held endless steep metal staircases. It was very difficult to explore. This scene was on one of the upper floors, and I just love the leading lines, the soft color, and the lighting. And this is a farmhouse and its collection of old televisions. And I found this comp this way. This scene seemed like an avant-garde art installation. When you open the door into the silence of an abandonment, you often feel the absolute emptiness of a place whose occupants are no longer there. And it's quite a surreal experience. This church holds so many elements: stained glass, vibrant color, cobwebs on the pews, crumbling ceilings and supports, and nature's hand invading the interior at the windowsill. And there's a historic cornerstone resting in the bottom left. These windows had a heavy covering of plastic on the exterior, and they obscured the view to the outside from the bottom half, but it allowed just enough light to filter beautifully through the stained glass. So you want to do this, but there are a lot of things you need to consider. The structural integrity is always questionable in anything abandoned. Mistakes inside abandonments often have zero-sum consequences. You live or you die as you fall through a floor. Soft floors, especially wooden floors holding carpets of moss, are ready to break with just the slightest pressure. After almost 9 years of avoiding falling through a floor, I earned my Urbex merit badge when I fell through a floor last October. Fortunately, it wasn't a long drop, and better yet, my gear was okay. I just got some nasty bruises. And then you have to worry about toxic elements. They're constant: asbestos, lead paint, PCBs, rodent and animal droppings, and especially black mold. You never want to run into people, though. People that hang in abandoned structures are not those you want to confront. Of course, you don't want to run into security personnel either, but I would rather run into a security officer than someone freely hanging in an abandonment. My group often runs into other explorers inside derelict structures, and that's okay, but it always evokes chills when you hear human activity within such a site. This is not an uncommon sight during my explorations. Oftentimes, floors are collapsed from the top floor to the basement, and this is a section in a mansion we explored. And then I had to hover at the edge of the doorway of this room to shoot this because the floor was ready to open up, and you can see a hole in the floor there. And that red and green on the floor, that reveals a disintegrating embassy-sized rug in the dining room. It was wet and moss covered, and it covered a rotting floor that was in a state of imminent collapse. As we explored this mansion, we had to hug the walls, and we rarely ventured into the middle of any room on the upper floors. It was pretty dangerous, but it was very neat. So you still want to do this. If you want to embark on this insanity, there are some ways to enter this arena with a good foundation. You need to master the art of low light photography because most abandonments are extremely dark, and you have to have the skill to be intuitive within a forbidden environment. You don't want to waste time fumbling with your settings when you're inside a forlorn structure. I dove headfirst into the Urbex fray for my first time, and I actually had to run within minutes, but I already had a good working knowledge of dark and variable lighting photography because at one time I shot concerts for a music magazine. And yes, I still miss those gigs very much. There are, however, endless possibilities for soft urbexing, that's what I call it, photographing sites that allow access. And these images are just as appealing as the hard version, which is no access allowed. But there are some hard, if you still want to do the risky stuff, there are hard X rules to live by. And live is the operative word. Never, ever explore alone. Never do that. Even if you're going with a group, it's still wise to tell someone outside the group where you are going and when you expect to be home. Never head to a location without research. Don't approach a large abandonment blind, as this makes you more prone to a bust. We often scout rural roads, and if we find homes or farms or small structures, we do snoop around. I rarely go into large industrial or institutional abandonments without research. Sometimes we do enter large complexes blind, but it isn't common, and we are quite seasoned with all of this nonsense. So we know what to expect and we know what to look for. Sometimes there won't be a cell signal at a location, so downloading a map for offsite viewing is a good idea too. And always carry a flashlight and have an extra one too. And always look before you step. It's just common sense stuff. Wear dark, comfortable clothing, cover your limbs, no shorts, and make sure your feet are properly covered. No sandals. Waterproof, sturdy boots are the best. And parking is very important. Analyze the parking situation before you get there. It goes without saying, but parking in front of a site posted with no trespassing signs is not the best strategy. You might have to walk a distance to get to a site, but always err on the side of safety. And there's still more rules. Tetanus shots are important. I've stepped on rusty nails and even one penetrated the sole of my hiking boot. I often return home with several cuts. Urbexing is difficult and exhausting at times. Being in shape and young is a bonus. It's a big bonus, and I wish I had that bonus. But always make sure you enter a door and don't let it close behind you. I often prop something up against the door if I open it. You don't want to be locked inside. Stay with your group too. Don't deviate from your group too much. And try to avoid touching anything as much as possible, as there are lots of toxic elements inside abandonments. And avoid carrying too much gear. Unnecessary weight will slow you down and you can't maneuver as easily. You do a lot of crawling and climbing, so you don't want to have a lot of heavy weight on you. And you can't run very fast with a lot of heavy weight. And never ever take anything. This is the golden rule of urbexing. And discovering locations. It's not difficult to find abandonments. Just look around. Look in your city, look in your countryside. Abandoned railroad tracks have lots of interesting stuff paralleling the rail line. Google Earth and map crawling are invaluable. You can find abandonments just by looking at the maps, especially in industrial towns that are past their past manufacturing glory days. Look at the satellite view and then drop to street view. This is a good start for research if you don't know of a specific location. Even if you know a location address, always study the satellite map and then drill it down with further research. Take a drive along country roads. There are so many treasures in the rural areas: farms, barns, homes, churches, general stores, old gas pumps. Sometimes you can find hints of locations in urbex photographs, street signs, names on buildings. I always jump in Photoshop and remove the names of a site or street sign so that my image is devoid of location information. And why is this so? Because once a location is revealed, vandals descend upon it and destroy it. That is always the case. So you want to keep your location secret. One time I even went so far as to blur the names off of headstones in a cemetery that sat in front of an abandoned church. Some urbexers, especially green urbexers, don't take this extra step, and you can find clues in a photograph and then proceed to the research. Instagram is a good place to find urbex collections. I also always remove my GPS metadata before posting. You can sometimes find it in other metadata and even in some Flickr albums. And read the comments on posted photos too. You can find clues there too. Oftentimes replies to a post drop the name of a site. If you are traveling somewhere and see a site along a road, pin it for later reference. Shooting, shoot raw, of course. Bracketing is helpful. I find this very helpful. I used to bracket only on a tripod, but I discovered within the past few years that bracketing while hand-holding is just as helpful. Photo editing software is so good now that there's no blur or ghosting when merging handheld images. I will add more about bracketing in a bit. Try to have your images tell a story about life that once existed in abandoned places. Sometimes the whole story can be represented in just one image. Sometimes a collection of images will work. Here's a little story about a boarding house in a once thriving resort region. This community kitchen is ready for dinner. The china's still in the cabinet, the coffee pot's on the cast iron stove, and there are still dishes in the sink. The house and its 1940s vibe was amazingly preserved and free from rampant vandalism. One wing of the home collapsed though, and some of the upper floors were on the verge of collapse, but it was a time capsule of history, and it revealed a quaint lifestyle that once was familiar to this region. And here's one of the guest rooms, but I had to stand to the far right of the doorway because the floor in some of the hallway was so soft and held a carpet of thick moss and growth. You can see holes in the floor. And I was unable to get a wide shot because of the floor instability, but you can see the layers of history on the wall with the varied wallpapers peeling away. And here's the dining room off the eat-in kitchen with the old work boots still sitting on the floor. The house wasn't level or square because some sections collapsed, so it was tough to shoot. But one room held a mass of old, pristine vintage newspapers from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. They were so fabulous, and they weren't even yellowed that much. I hope they're still sitting there in mint shape and they're not buried beneath a heap of collapsed roofing or destroyed by vandals. These should be preserved in an archive. Some general guidelines. With the exception of mastering low light photography, if you're acquainted with architectural photography, you should generally be comfortable with UE photography. I usually meter in the matrix mode. I think it's called evaluative for Canon users, but for stained glass or window scenes, I often flip to spot metering, a trick I always use for concert photography. I don't always do this though, because I want to get in and out as quickly as possible, and I usually default to the fast track and remain on matrix metering. Bracketing often overcomes the need to switch metering modes, but then there's the extra time needed in post-processing. Of course, my optimal preference is to set my ISO to 200, have my camera on a tripod, but this isn't always a luxury when I'm hard urbexing, and I put my camera in auto ISO and let it do its thing. And it often jumps to 12,800. Noise can be a problem, but it's not unbearable, and I spot mask noise removal in post. As I noted, I don't have the luxury of taking my time with long exposures in hard urbex locations. I shoot an aperture priority when I'm doing this. My preferred f-stop is f8, and I let the shutter speed adjust accordingly. I do this strictly for speed. I want to get in and out quickly. The longer you're in, the more chances are you're going to get busted. Sometimes though, it's so dark that I have to open up and let more light in my lens, and I have to jump off f8. I shoot manual if I'm on a tripod and if I don't have to look over my shoulder. Some photographers often balk at aperture mode, but I am after the best results with the minimum time during hard urbexes. And don't be tethered to photographic rules. Make the composition what you see or what you want others to see. Such as this, I break the rule of thirds here, but I do like the composition. The window looks like it was watercolored on the outside with a wash of blended greens and yellows. And I love the varied vines autographing the glass. This was in an industrial complex that's no longer standing. It was in Delaware. Focusing in dark environments is very problematic. Autofocus will jump around and it won't lock if you can't measure the light. If you don't have an autofocus assist beam on your camera, there are some easy tricks for focusing. First, I highly recommend using an assigned back button focus. I'll never return to pressing the shutter for a focus. Back button focus is precise, and I got the hang of it in just about an hour. To focus in dark settings, shine a flashlight on your subject and use the back button focus to set and lock it. If you have the luxury of being on a tripod, switch to manual after you lock in your focus. If you don't have a tripod, just use the locked in focus and shoot. Be careful with flashlights and abandonments. They can draw attention to the outside of see-through windows. I was told laser pointers are useful too, although I never used one. Some laser pointers create little images with the beam, and that's even better for setting a focus point, and it will draw less attention to the presence than a flashlight. Bracketing and light painting. Bracketing, set it to how many exposures you want. I can go up to 9, but I often just bracket 4 or 5. I rarely use more than 2 frames for a blend, and usually select the darkest, especially with windows, and one in the mid-range to lighter brackets. I blend the brackets in Photoshop or Photomatix and then send back to Lightroom for editing. I always desaturate and look at the contrasts if I use Photomatix, although their presets have greatly improved in the past few years, especially Photomatix's balanced photographic and natural presets. For light painting, you just you need a tripod for light painting. You can't do this handheld. I've never tried it. and I don't think it can be done, but you point a flashlight or laser at the subject and you set the focus. When your camera's on a tripod, switch lens to manual mode, set about 30 seconds or in bulb mode. And while the shutter is open, you paint the room with the flashlight and uniform strokes up and down, side to side. I use bulb mode and keep a count to less than 30 seconds. You can also point a stronger flashlight at the ceiling or wall behind you and keep it steady for about 30 seconds. When the shutter closes, you check your exposure. If it's too bright, cut ISO to a lower level. And if it's too dark, hike the ISO, or better yet, open the aperture. Here are 2 blended brackets. And I wanted to bracket this image because the scene is a symbolic study in great contrast. This house represents the loss of a dream, but when peering out the window, one sees someone's dream still alive and well with the beautiful house on a lovely piece of property. The window was quite hazy and dirty on the upper half, so I was unable to get all the detail and color, but I still like the symbolism of the 2 contrasts. And besides, the haziness of the image in the window makes the view of the so-called American dream seem like an actual dream. And here's a light painted image of an array of endless bottles of muscatel. I guess the owner was hoarding muscatel for the apocalypse because there were so many. It's a strange thing to find inside an abandoned slaughterhouse. 3 of us were about to explore this slaughterhouse and didn't know the owner was inside. So yes, we got caught, but the owner was cordial, gave us a little tour, but allowed only one of us to photograph. And I pulled the winning straw for the photography. The owner took us into the pitch black basement, and he wanted to show us a 1930s Roadster chassis, and it was cool, but I zeroed in on this weird collection of cheap booze. When you shoot urbex, you want to capture the beauty in unforgiving environments. Natural elements are important for the urbex composition and include light beams through windows, roofs, crumbling walls, in addition to nature's green hand taking hold. Plants and interiors are always symbolic offsets to the death and decay of a man-made structure. Man-made elements show how a structure was used and the types of people who occupied it. Artifacts are always welcome. Items left behind tell the story of the place and its history. Look for calendars, small machinery or appliances, envelopes with postage marks, clothing, commercial goods. And there's always a lonely chair in an abandonment. The place can be stripped of everything in the interior, but there's always a chair, and a chair can make for an interesting composition. There are social media groups dedicated to the concept of the lonely chair. Graffiti is a personal choice. Some love it, some hate it. I generally don't like it, but I found some interesting graffiti that complements a composition. Some of it is amazing, but most of it is harsh and defacing. Peeling paint, it's the gold standard for urbex photography, always interesting and omnipresent. Machinery is fascinating too, rusty and sometimes ominous in appearance. It often presents a picture of America's past manufacturing glory days, and it can put history front and center. Here's a rural church, and I didn't realize that I caught a light beam until I dropped the raw image into Lightroom. And I love the twinkle of the sun poking through the roof opening. I don't think this image would be as interesting without the lovely sunburst. I visited a distillery and I wished I had bracketed this shot, but it was still a fun comp. I asked my friend to stand in the beam. It was very dark inside and I brought in a bit too much noise and haze, but I still like it. This was at an industrial abandonment that we found by accident. It was huge, pristine, and full of mature growth. I just loved it. One rarely finds abandoned facilities with so many artifacts left behind and absent of graffiti or vandalism, and this place was just awesome. What is fascinating about this comp is that there is a 1914 capitation tax receipt on the dresser. A capitation tax is also known as a poll tax. I had to shoot it from afar because the floor was a bit too soft. I couldn't read the receipt until I dropped the image into Lightroom. Initially, I was focused on the powder puffs because they reminded me of something my grandmother used, but then the capitation tax receipt turned into the photo prize. It's one of my favorite shots. Here's a lonely chair that beautifully complements the living room bump out of a surgeon's mansion. The comp would not be as interesting without that mid-century chair. I love the terrific color and lighting. And here's another lonely chair in a derelict hospital. So much texture in the chair too. It's just a study in institutional green. As noted, I'm usually not a fan of graffiti, but in this case, it was so lovely. The sun is pushing through an opening and illuminating the graffiti in the warehouse portion of a textile manufacturing facility. This illumination makes the graffiti look like stained glass, and the water reflections are so vibrant in an environment stripped of color. Here's another example of graffiti I embrace, and it presents a multi-layered story. This is an impromptu historical message board, courtesy of pink-slipped Cambria Steel Company workers. The terminated workers registered their comments on the brick wall as they exited the administrative office with their layoff notices and their last paychecks. Cambria is in Johnstown, and I attended a meetup at this site. Johnstown is part of the Rust Belt, where economic decline, population flight, and urban neglect replaced a once mighty manufacturing region. Here's the vibrant color and life of nature claiming dead space in a hospital. The side windows were frosted and semi-opaque, but allowed the emergence of interesting, colorful silhouettes. Nature's power is always on the mark, and it's always ready to engulf the built environment. Here's one case where bracketing would have obscured the simple graffiti on the window. The peeling paint is the star, but the other photographic elements, such as the curvy leading line of the staircase and the papers on the staircase, complement the image. Holmesburg Prison has the best peeling paint. It's colorful ribbons and sheets of paint dangling on all surfaces. The peeling paint is so dramatic in this scene that it looks like a deliberate art installation. The corridor skylights allow the strong beams of sunlight to paint some of the surfaces in vivid yellow. This looks like a fantasy setting. This control panel has it all: detailed texture, switches, gauges, peeling paint, and color. It reminds me of a giant toy or some gizmo created from a plan featured in a 1960s issue of Mechanics Illustrated. Its homemade looking appearance is too amusing and interesting to be just a staid control panel. This giant loom is spectacular, and I wish someone would remove it and place it in a museum. This loom was part of a textile manufacturer that also built a robust company town for its workers. There's too much history and craft here to be surrendered to vandals and rot. And here's another imposing piece of machinery from the Cambria Steelworks blacksmith shop. This is a 10-ton steam-powered hammer. The color of the brick, doors, and window trim coordinates so well with the rusty giant hammer and massive hanging chain and hook. It's like Granimal styling for heavy machinery. Stained glass is so beautiful and difficult to capture, but it's my favorite feature in abandoned churches. The photographic process is similar to shooting musicians, but easier because stained glass doesn't move. There are a few ways to grab stained glass. Using a tripod is the best, but I often do not use a tripod. A cloudy white balance often helps, and especially with spot or center weighted metering. With spot metering, though, the areas around the glass will be dark. Another method is to matrix meter and underexpose by dialing down the exposure compensation by -1 to -2. Bracketing and merging one window shot that is overexposed and one underexposed is a good plan, but never use flash for stained glass. If I'm on a tripod, I often do spot metering and then switch to matrix metering to get the surrounding areas, and then I blended 2 shots. I handheld this shot and blended 2 shots. I bracketed it and matrix metered, but dialed down my exposure compensation to -1. The interior of this church was very dark, and the stained glass windows were covered with thick plastic on the outside, but I especially wanted to catch the cobwebs in addition to the stained glass and door detail. I was on a tripod for this, so I only have 1 frame. I use a tripod because I was in a workshop and didn't have to look over my shoulder. The stained glass was a ceiling dome and it's so beautiful. I spot metered on a tripod, and this is one frame. The surrounding areas were very dark because of the spot metering, but during editing, I just brushed in a small amount of exposure in the surround. The dome is the star though, and I didn't want anything else detracting from it. So I kept the dome frame around it on the dark side. There are so many software suites available for editing, and all are good. I learned digital editing in Lightroom, and that's my preference. I learned Lightroom before Photoshop. I use both, but Photoshop is primarily my surgery and blending application. Whatever you find comfortable and works with you, stay with it. I have primarily two workflows. One is using only Lightroom and Photoshop if some surgery is needed, and that would be transformation, adding canvas or content aware. Blending images adds more step to the workflow, but all is just quite intuitive and fast for me. I always have more editing to do when I hard urbex because of the hand holding. I usually have to jump into Photoshop for transformation and straighten things out, and adjust the perspective. But I can take my time when I'm in a sanctioned place and avoid many post-processing steps. What can I say about HDR? It can be hideous, but it can be quite useful for blending images. Just make editing adjustment to reduce any effects that scream HDR. Desaturate and take a good look at contrast. Photoshop is always the better process for blending, but it does take a lot more time. Gray tones can be a problem, especially with Windows. If you pull up the highlight slider to bring out more highlights, the white's gray. You can adjust this by pulling up the whites as you bring out more highlights, but this doesn't always allow for a preferred white. In Lightroom, if I mask an area and add highlights and it overlaps windows or anything with strong whites, I then erase the highlights in that area. I also brush in exposure to add to any grayish areas during a global highlight addition. Just avoid the gray as much as possible, especially with windows. Lightroom does a good job of getting rid of chromatic aberrations, but sometimes you have to bring in the manual dropper for removal. And I don't know what's going on with this fake lens flare trend, but it needs to go away. We all get lens flare at times, and most often if the sun is blaring into the lens, but sometimes you are in the wrong spot and you have no choice. You can't avoid direct sun. I never use Lightroom to remove flare, and I have to jump into Photoshop and chip away a little sections at a time to remove it. It requires a lot of patience. So what do you want to do? You won't hear me pushing for anything not sanctioned, and I think there are enough soft sites to satisfy your decay photography needs. And here are so many opportunities you can test your skills at before you jump into the dirty stuff. There's so much public access and many meetups, workshop opportunities for a multitude of abandoned structures, and you don't have to look over your shoulder or run from anything. Forts are terrific. Fort Washington has several decayed batteries off the beaten path. Fort Hancock is my favorite. The entire footprint looks abandoned. Mallows Bay has great shipwrecks and offers the best drone images. It's best to see these with a kayak, but you can still see several along the shoreline. You just have to make sure you look at the tide charts and go there at low tide. Old Town Mall in Baltimore is an outdoor retail center that has roots to the 1600s. It's several blocks of boarded merchants, but it holds some beautiful architectural details and ghost signs. It's fascinating. You can get some great long shots of just abandonment, like a ghost town. National Park Seminary in Maryland looks like a set for Grimm's fairy tales. Lots of weird abandoned architecture amidst the new. There's a castle that is covered in vines. It's just very strange and interesting. Penitentiaries are great for practicing urbex skills. You can find photo tours of these places, and many meetups offer photo exclusive visits, but I understand some are collapsing that opportunity. Savage Mill in Maryland is quite photogenic. There are no trespassing signs at the mill, but there are always people fishing from the mill pad and have lots of people congregating on the structure. It's easy to access, and I've never known anyone to be told to leave this site. So if you want to try your hand at hard urbexing, this might be a good start. The pile of old Capitol East Portico stones in Rock Creek Park's woods is like seeing something that should be in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Lots of history and fascination at the spot, and it's a lovely stroll too. I like to go when the overgrowth is best, but fall is nice too. It's a very unusual site, and there's a lot of piles of stone with a lot of detail. It's very fascinating. East Broadtop Railroad with its roundhouse, steam engines, and machine shop is a delight, and you can hop on a workshop or a meetup. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum has terrific workshops. I've been there twice. I liked it a lot. The presidential heads in Williamsburg are astonishing to shoot. If you can hop on a workshop here, I highly recommend it, but never trespass here. It's heavily cambered and at all points of entry. Waterside Woolen Mill, so much to shoot here, so much. Look for workshops and meetups. And just walking through old steel towns of the Rust Belt is just visually rich. Lots of faded ghost signs and buildings and boarded up merchants, in addition to so many empty facades and factories. The stillness of steel towns is a powerful feeling as you walk through these streets. We do that quite frequently. And then just take a ride in the country, as I said. Iron Soup in Ohio is a former Youngstown Steel Company town. You can contact the Iron Soup Historical Society and find out about photographer access. I went on a meetup event, so look for these too. Dupont Underground is very strange but worthy. I'm not sure if there'll be any more opportunities to photograph the tunnels because it's evolving into an arts facility, but just keep an eye out for opportunities. And then there's Cooper High School in Shenandoah, PA. That's a great place to shoot. And there are lots of meetups and workshops here too. Catskill Game Farms is incredible. It's huge at 300 acres. I visited 3 times and always find it delightful. There's beautiful meandering trails and in the woods and endless buildings to explore. There are workshops for this. Now we'll get into some soft urbex before I go into the hard stuff. We found this general store along our way to a rural abandonment. We passed the structure, turned around, and grabbed the shots. It was sealed, but it was so quaint and picturesque. It has great color and texture too. Many abandonments lack color, but this one popped because of the vintage gas pumps and the snaking ivy. Here's another rural find, and this site had so many detailed options for comps. I muddied the name on the front and side signs before I posted it. This general store / gas station was across from an active house, so we didn't snoop around, but we spent a good deal of time taking fabulous photos. We've never had any issues photographing exteriors of roadside sites, no matter how busy the surroundings are. Here's another perspective from that site. Great rust peeling paint and old signs. There's a wonderful copper bell in the upper left corner of the garage, and I got a great close-up of that too. The tree is the focal point in this photo, but the red house planks make the image pop. There were turkeys on this property, and they followed me around as I shot this house. I got some great close-ups of colorful turkey faces too, a bonus. Fort Washington is terrific. Besides the giant maintained fort that everyone visits, there are abandoned batteries in the woods that surround the main fort. Several of the batteries are very difficult to get to, but I was able to navigate the terrain, and I'm old, so you can do it too. This battery Emery, is my favorite. Emery is really easy to access, and it's next to a parking lot. Picnic area C, as a matter of fact. Emery is large and gritty, and there's some metal gun turret assemblies scattered around. There's also a great dump behind the battery, and the dump holds some really special history. It holds pieces of the incredibly detailed Macmillan fountain that once was part of the demolished Truxton Circle that was once at the intersection of North Capitol Street, Florida Avenue, and Q Street. Just get a map of Fort Washington and you can easily plot the trails to the abandoned batteries. It's worth a look, and the park is great for a good hike. Here's a battery emery gun emplacement. All seasons are wonderful for photography at forts. The interior of this battery is accessible too. Just take a flashlight and watch your step. The muddy floors can be very slick, especially the steps up to the upper levels. Fort Hunt in Alexandria is a small but lovely park. The 4 batteries are close to each other, and accessing them is an easy flat walk. I was cursing the sun this morning, but when I saw the starburst in Lightroom, I got my lemonade from the Sun Lemon blaring into my lens. Fort Hancock in Sandy Hook, New Jersey is my absolute favorite fort. It's enormous, and almost every square inch looks decayed and abandoned. I had only an hour to photograph Hancock because I got there just before sundown and it was also a rainy day. But with speed, I was able to get some great shots, including this fabulous decommissioned Nike missile showing off on a catapult. There's a fence around the missile and you can see it in the rear. So I crawled up the fence just enough to hold my camera over it and get an unobstructed shot. And I found a pile of mortars just resting in front of an old battery. It's very strange to find things like this, but a very welcome find indeed. There's so much color at this fort. This is one of the maintenance buildings at the far end of the fort footprint. And I love the vibrant door color and the crawling vines. Here's a subterranean battery at Hancock. The mortar pit is to the left of that yellow frame door head, and the inner chambers behind the door are subsurface. The rails would carry the mortars to the gun emplacements. I know how to get into those batteries too. You have to go in from the back, but I was running at it. We only had less than an hour, and I didn't have time to do everything I wanted. I'm going to go back. If you have an opportunity to visit Swannanoa Palace, I recommend it. It's such a beautiful mansion. The jewel of the site is this massive, pristine Tiffany window at the landing of the grand staircase. It's the image of the original owner's wife. The Tiffany window was not an easy shoot to grab because it's so dark inside and the window is so bright. I recommend spot metering the window and then bracketing and matrix metering. Use a tripod. Sometimes meetups hold events here, and oftentimes the current owner holds his Swannanoa days. The best is a meetup or a workshop though, because there are less people battling for a spot in front of this beautiful window. The gardens are opulent too. This is one of the long trellis gazebos that look over the mountain, and there are fountains, marble benches, and terrace landscaping scattered about. Here's a view from the top of the grand staircase. It has everything: the artistry of the ceiling dome, the marquetry of the wood floor, door columns, wrought iron, carved wood, and that wonderful window. There's so much rich architectural detail, and it's all present in this one spot. This is the Swannanoa stable house. It's a little bit of a walk down a path behind the mansion. The stable house was wide open. I don't know if it's still accessible, but it was when I was there 2 times. Here's the interior of the stable house. The lonely chair coordinates so well with the structural crumbling. And the horse stall section has just beautiful light. Here's another good photo site, East Broad Top Railroad in Pennsylvania. I visited several times with my meetup, and it's a feast for photography. The railroad began operations in 1881 and it closed in 1956, but it still holds everything beautifully preserved in the roundhouse, train station, and machine shop. This is one of the oldest roundhouses in the United States, and it houses 6 vintage steam locomotives dating to 1911. East Broad Top is attempting to ready some steam locomotives for short tourist trips, so I'm not sure what their status is for allowing photo groups in the future, but if you see any opportunities to visit it, I highly recommend it. Here's a collection from the machine shop. East Broad Top served coal hulls for the region, and then when coal lost its luster, so did the railroad. Okay, penitentiaries in states of arrested decay are wonderful for UE photography. This is an upper level Eastern State Penitentiary cell block. When I was there, you could buy a tripod permit for $10 along with the ESP admission fee. As I understand, they're getting a little tight with their allowances for photography. So I don't know what the status is anymore. If you go during regular admission times, make sure you get there when the doors open because it gets quite crowded. This is Ohio State Reformatory. It's a huge prison that has the largest freestanding cell block in the world. It's also known as the Shawshank Prison. This is the set for that movie. The right image is part of the prison chapel. And I got special photo access here, and I know there's some workshops that have it. I contacted the prison directly to get special access an hour before the site opened and was allowed to photograph spaces not open to the tourists. But here's a big hint. If for good photo ops, go at a good time. I went during the first week in April, and I was the only one with special photo access. After my special access, I only encountered 5 tourists throughout the prison in 5 hours. This place is quite large, but it can get very crowded at some times during the year. This is one of my favorite Ohio Reformatory images. The X is the light from the 4 rooms, and from the 4 rooms windows, and I quickly set up my tripod to grab it before clouds obscured it. The color and textures pop too. I wasn't aware that I captured a light burst from the light until I loaded the raw images in Lightroom, so that was a bonus. The staircase leads to the chapel. The Holmesburg prison is spectacular. I was able to acquire access via one workshop and one from the Philadelphia Bureau of Prisons. A few years ago, though, the Prison Bureau shut down any photo group access, and I doubt they will reinstate it in any time in the near future. They won't respond to any inquiries either. So I don't know if they'll ever let any more photographers in. It's a shame. I love this prison. It's like a smaller version of ESP, but it's grittier. And this image presents the central core for central block access. That dome is a prop from a 1990s movie. It was filmed shortly after Holmesburg closed. The dome presents a haunting composition, though. It's like a dystopian Thunderdome vision. Holmesburg has really daunting prison doors. I don't think anyone can pick this lock. The dirt is thick at Holmesburg, and it has amazing bold peeling paint everywhere. Flags of paint hang from all surfaces. Here's a look down a Holmesburg cell block. And if that doesn't look medieval, I don't know what does. There's so much metal and peeling paint. It looks like a tunnel of terror. The cell on the right was once a padded cell, and the pads have since detached from the walls. It's lovely natural light, though. Dupont Underground is a former DC trolley site. I held a meetup here a few years ago, but I'm not sure that they're allowing any more photo ops deep inside that black pit ahead. While I was there, a band videotaped their music in sync with a colorful and changing light show inside this tunnel, and I was able to see this. I was fortunate enough to grab a new artful twist on urbex photography. The Dupont trolley service shuttered in '62, and after this, the site served as a fallout shelter and later tried to be a food court that lasted less than a year. Now it's attempting to revive as an art center. And here's another shot of that light show, and I have about 100 different colorful patterns. It was wonderful. After this, I went into the black tunnels. You need a flashlight, a headlamp would have been better, and a tripod is definitely a must. There's an old food court ahead, and I light painted the various food vendor spots before I proceeded to the tunnels. I walked to the tunnel split, light painted it, and headed back to the platforms. There's a piano sitting on the tracks near the split deep inside, and I light painted it, but no one knows how the piano got there. It's a very strange thing to find in trolley tunnels. Old vehicles are always great to shoot. There's so many options for close-up shots too. These shots are always popular with social media. The old dilapidated building behind this old Mack truck is a good frame anchor for this colorful truck. This is taken at the truck farm in Virginia. I'm sure most of you have been there. This was inside the truck farm garage, and it held some old vintage vehicles. And I like taking close-up shots too of things. As I did here, a color and texture close-up took this at Chris Swell's junkyard. Okay, here's Variety Theater in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a magnificent theater that is getting a second chance at restoration. I attended a workshop here, but here's a fun fact about this theater. Toward the end of its life, Variety used the theater as a concert venue. Motorhead was Variety's last performance and also sealed the closing fate of this theater. Motorhead's performance was so loud that plaster rained down on the concert attendees. Variety's maintenance man worried about the falling ceiling parts, so he shut all the power to the performance, and of course the band frontman Lemmy Kilmister was not happy at all. But Motorhead's performance was so loud that people living in the neighborhood recorded the performance from inside their homes. Multiple legal complaints and about noise and nuisances ensued, and the court complied and ordered Variety to shutter. It was dark for decades until a local group formed to build support and restoration efforts for this theater in its grand palace design. Here's the balcony area of this theater. There might be a workshop for this theater coming up. My friend is trying to set up a meetup here, but isn't going to pursue it till late spring or summer. I'm not sure it will be a go or what the state of the renovation is, but if there is a meetup, it's still a gorgeous palace style theater to photograph. It's stunning. And this is the ornate lobby of Variety. There's beautiful detail on the ceiling and a popping red chandelier. This is Victory Theater in Massachusetts. It's also a workshop I attended. I took 2 similar shots here, different composition. The film Seated in the Sink is the star. Phillipsburg Pump House. I visited it twice, once with the meetup and once with the workshop. This site is also a depository for old New Jersey transportation memorabilia, old signs, signal poles, switching arms, lights, etc. The left image features the massive 51-foot tall vertical triple expansion water pump. It was built in 1913 and it fed water to a reservoir from a reservoir to its local community. The right image shows the great amount of transportation junk in this facility. The pump is located through that double green door. There are some great old vehicles and artifacts on the outside of the property too. An abandoned house sits on the property, but it's quite trashed. This is a handheld pump house shot at a high ISO. I don't think I could have squeezed a tripod in this spot. So now, here's the down and dirty stuff. I won't be revealing any locations, just generalities. Unless the sites have been demoed, then I can note their locations. But having said that, I have ventured into some crazy sites and have had some crazy hair-raising experiences. This activity isn't for everyone, so make sure it's something you want to do. If you pick, go. This China factory was just superb. So much to see and shoot. It's an enormous footprint, and even with a good part of it already burned to the ground. I had to pick up my jaw from the ground when I walked inside, and this was the first scene I saw. It's fairly easy to access, but it's attached to an active facility, so one has to be very quiet. I love the swirl of plates on the floor. I couldn't believe the amount of ceramics throughout this facility. And here's another great view of the factory with a shipping crate of cups cascading from it. There's so much to shoot at this site. There are offices with old furniture, sections with endless shallow trays of china decals, machinery kilns, symmetrical columns, and lots of great windows and beautiful natural light. This factory dates to 1901, and it hung on to operations until 1991. But because this factory is located in a former steel town, it was unable to escape the consequences of big steel's retraction and the detritus that comes from economic decline, population loss, and urban disintegration. This strange structure is in the ceramic production area, and I love the green invasion, the old china molds sitting amid the greens, and the blue casts on the dirty windows. It's natural light. It's all natural light too. It's lovely. It was raining heavily when we visited the china factory, so I took advantage of a hole in the roof with a waterfall flowing from it. It was handheld with a high ISO, but I still like it very much. Didn't get too noisy either. I visited this rural home with my friend, and it was wide open. Another time capsule. This is the living room that had only 3 working walls. One was completely blown out. There's so many old artifacts in this house. This is the house that included that capitation tax receipt I posted earlier. I like the still life in the corner of the kitchen, the textures, color, and lighting. Here's an abandoned house within an abandoned house. I love the irony of it. There wasn't much in this house, but this was the prize, and we drove more than 3 hours to grab the image of this prize. It's beautiful natural lighting. I like this composition, and this is how I found it. The colors and lighting are wonderful, although it was very dark inside. My friends love to explore homes, so that's why I have a lot of images of homes. I prefer industrial shots, but they're home people. This house was a treasure trove of artifacts. It's always sad to see so many family photos, letters, personal artifacts as cast-offs. This house had especially personal artifacts, including military uniforms, bronze military boots, medals, personal notes, and jewelry. I just don't understand why there isn't any family that wants these memories. Homes always rip out my heart when I explore them, especially when they look like this. The attic of this filled house. Some nature forced its way inside, but other vines are shut out and plastered against the window in hope of entry. It's a metaphor for some of us hardcore urban explorers. There were old photos and books scattered about, and that old organ is very special too. Here's the living room of another house, and it's complete with portraits, family samplers, a sewing box, a crochet throw, reading glasses on the table next to the phone. At one time, this room must have been very warm and cozy and filled with family and pets. Compositions like this are difficult for me to view, especially when such personal possessions are front and center. Everyone wants to be remembered, and that is why I never understand such scenes holding so many discarded personal effects. In images like this, the sadness of the forgotten life is so pronounced, and the scene most certainly taunts the heartwarming essence inherent in the home sweet home ideal. This house was filled with personal portraits everywhere and notes, and it was very difficult. Here's a magnificent manor house. I would have preferred to take my time to manage this composition better, but because the site is so exposed and next to an active golf course, it was risky, but it was also raining that day, so I couldn't dawdle, so a grab and go shot was what it was. I think this estate and its property recently sold, but I hope it receives the restoration it deserves because the architecture is remarkable. I can easily see this manor house serving as the entertainment and gathering site for the adjacent golf course, but I fear though that it's going to be razed with another cookie cutter housing development taking its place. This is the gorgeous greenhouse attached to this manor house. It's my favorite part of this grand old lady. It's double tiered and its design was so appealing and inviting. I can imagine how grand it was in its heyday with plants cultivated to beautify the interior of this mansion. Many of the manor house bedrooms look like this. Another was blue, another one was yellow, and one was pink. Most had sitting rooms like this too. All had ornate fireplaces and beautiful woodwork. There was nice color throughout this manor house, though it lacked artifacts. It wasn't in great shape either. This is a historic machine shop that evolved into a facility that manufactured large metal presses. It's been abandoned for more than 50 years. I love the way nature claimed the interior. I scratched myself. And the gantry crane looms like an ominous sentry above the factory footprint. There's much color in this industrial site, and it's courtesy of Mother Nature, the colorful glass on the ceiling and sides, and there's lots of graffiti. The factory was easy to access. It was very pleasant to explore, and it held machinery artifacts, forklifts, and even a large metal press.
Suck my dick.
Yes? Oh, I thought somebody asked me something, sorry.
No, I think somebody just was off mute. You're good.
Okay. I scratched myself, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. My nails are too sharp.
Perfect for your event here.
Yes, I know, I do this all, I can't even stay unwounded, while I'm sitting on my desk. Well, this site is one of my favorite sites for photos, my photo collections, but it was also one of the riskiest and definitely one of the most difficult. This is a former tuberculosis hospital, and it's extremely high risk to access because the front is cameraed and there's an active security facility next to it. And there's also much activity in the front parking lot because utility vehicles park there when not in use. If you get caught inside, the state does not take too kindly to the invasion. Normally, I wouldn't consider such high-risk sites, as it's not worth it to me at this point after so many years of doing this insanity. But it was my friend's birthday. This is what she wanted to do. So off I went and joined along with the crazy groupthink mentality. We took a long path through the woods behind the hospital and had to plow through an endless path of 3 to 5 foot tall sticker bushes. We crawled over boulders and lots of uneven terrain. I kept looking for snakes because of all the rock in our path. We were a bit bloody, sort of what I look like now, by the time we reached the hospital, courtesy of the sticker bushes. But then there was another obstacle, a very steep, muddy slope that required more crazy navigation. My 2 friends went first, and by the time it was my turn, the steep slope turned into a slick, muddy slip and slide. I was almost to the top and I started sliding, but somehow got turned around, landed on my back, but I was able to catch a tree branch with one hand and hang there. I was hanging to the branch and tried to turn around, pull myself up, but it was for naught because I couldn't get a footing. I threw my camera bag to my friends, kept pounding my heel into the mud for a footing wedge, and eventually was able to pull myself up to the top. But my backside from head to toe was a heavy strip of mud, and it stayed that way until I got home. I can't imagine what onlookers said of my look when we made pit stops on the way home. So I'm thinking maybe I should carry a second set of clothes and a hat for these adventures. But this ordeal was so worth it because I love the many green verandas. Nature has run amok here, and I just love it. Here's another veranda that served the tuberculosis patients. They would sit here, take in fresh air as they looked over a lovely fertile valley. Here's one of the end rooms on the 2nd floor with nature still making its presence everywhere. Great windows and vines. The state removed the staircase from the hospital because they wanted to keep people like us out. So to get to the upper level, a metal headboard was propped against a wall for climbing to the 2nd floor. It was very dark in parts, including the area that required a climb on the headboard. And I didn't know what this was until the drive home. And my friend informed me that what I was climbing on. So crazy is as crazy does. And here's another view of an open door and old hospital bed frames propped against the wall. An old medical book sits amidst the hills and valleys of dirt and dust. The natural light is also so beautiful in this place. The dust and debris falling off the walls collected in the halls, and some hallways look like long rows of sand dunes. The front part was very dark, but the backside with all the verandas was just bathed in beautiful natural light. Here's a power plant that's now being demolished. This is the control room circle. My friend wanted to visit this, and I said I would go on one condition only, that we leave at 6 a.m. because the site is situated on a busy highway. It was hard to get into. There was a 10-inch opening under a garage door opening, so you had to push yourself through, and I tore all my clothes getting through that. And it was in the mid-90s and humid. It was a hard to explore. There were endless comps inside, and this site has so many steep metal staircases everywhere, lots and lots and lots of them. It was difficult but worthy explore. Here's another shot from it, and that muck in the pool at the base of that giant metal contraption doesn't look too inviting. A shot through a window. I love windows. I can reveal this place because it was demoed last year. This is the former industrial giant of Baltimore, PEMCO, the industrial ceramics manufacturer. It was established in 1911, and it had a huge footprint of buildings that ceased operations in 2006. This site was fairly easy to access. There's a room, this is a room holding pallets of cryolite powder. It's used in metallurgy for the manufacture of enamel products. But my favorite is the green drapes on the windows. I'm addicted to windows. Here's the long PEMCO stop sign corridor. Lots of graffiti and color. It was pretty trash, but it was a fun explore. There's a room with, I don't have an image here, but it's just loaded with colored ceramic balls, piles of blue balls and piles of red balls and yellow ball. It just pulverizes the dye in the hoppers for the process. It was an interesting site. Okay, this is an abandoned historic cemetery on a shoreline. It's not really accessible because to reach it, you have to cross private property, and the cemetery is considered private property too. We walked down a long private drive and took a hard left at the end of it and followed a tree line to the cemetery. The site holds so much local history. This is an old grave that has so much interest, including an 1812 war marker and a very old, tattered and faded American flag. A family stone in the upper left notes a birth date in the 1700s. The sad reality of the cemetery, though, is that it is slowly disappearing due to beach erosion and rising water levels. Many of the cemetery remains have already been swept out to sea. The next shot is quite disturbing, and I hope it's not too offensive, but it is what it is, and it's a statement about our society. This is one of my shoreline shots. One sees too many vaults, headstones littered among the shoreline. The cemetery holds some vaults on the top of the soil too. It's disturbing and shocking to see. The site is watched, so we were lucky to be able to photograph it without being seen. I wish something could be done to prevent any more remains from floating out to sea, though. I just don't understand, where are the families of these buried souls? There is quite a bit of history in this cemetery, so I don't know why it doesn't have a historical status. Okay, I can reveal this site too because it was demolished and is now a rolling meadow in Patapsco State Park. This is Henryton Tuberculosis Sanitarium in Marriottsville, Maryland, and it was a massive campus. Some of the buildings were so beautiful. The complex is historic too because when it opened, it was a state-of-the-art African-American tuberculosis sanitarium. But just as the scourge of tuberculosis drove the birth of Henryton, Henryton evolved into a local scourge during its almost 3 decades of abandonment. The Maryland government faced ever-present drug problems on the site, vandalism, and so much arson. Because utilities were shut off, there was no access to water to extinguish arsonist fires. since the hospital sat in the middle of a state park. The site was difficult to monitor too, but that also made it very easy to explore. Despite pressure from the preservationists, the Maryland government finally threw up their hands, circular filed any plans for repurposing the historical site, and razed Henryton after the last big fire in 2013. This Henryton hallway was typical. Part of the roof is missing and there were gaping holes in the flooring. Asbestos was everywhere. The other image is a window view from a building at the high end of the property. The campus was not flat, and there were many buildings were on terraced property with lovely snaking drive to the various buildings. It was a lovely campus. Here's a rural diner, very quaint and well preserved, with lots of old-fashioned artifacts, including menus and an old adding machine. It was very, very dark inside though. Here's a very pristine 50s looking diner. I just want somebody to rescue it. I hate to see it destroyed. This was an interesting sight and a fortuitous encounter. We were on our way home from a long day of exploration, and we wanted to shoot this charming 1875 abandoned covered bridge as our last stop. We knew the bridge was on private farm property, so we parked on the highway and walked to it, thinking we could quietly sneak in, shoot and go. We arrived, and all at once, a drove of happy piglets started running towards us. They were like Walmart greeters, dozens of them. The piglets made lots of noise, and the mama and papa pigs weren't happy about their piglets being so social. So we started shooting the bridge, and I was at the far end when I saw my friends walking towards a man at the other end. The man my friends walked to was a farmer that owned the property, and yes, we got caught again. But he was so friendly, and he warned us to stay away from the cranky adult pigs because they can snap on a whim.
Mm-hmm.
You see that building ahead? That's an abandoned grist mill, one built in the twilight phase of the first industrial revolution in 1852, and it closed in 1932. The farmer owned this grist mill too, and my friend managed to charm the farmer into letting us inside. It was almost sundown, so we had less than an hour of light, but we were able to get inside. And he went to his house and returned with this enormous skeleton key, and we couldn't believe our good fortune. What we saw inside was an incredible collection of artifacts and machinery undisturbed for nearly 90 years. It was quite large too, at 4 levels. There was so much Americana inside this grist mill. I found 3 early 1900 photography books and a pile of Kennedy moth-proof garment bags made by the Kennedy Car Liner and Bag Company. Such a great find, but 40 minutes wasn't enough. We were so lucky to have this time, and we saw things that no one will see. See how open my lens was? I was at f4 at a high ISO. It was very dark. Here's a few more vintage things we found. Vintage commercial posters, cast iron stoves, and all the original 19th century machinery was there. The stone grinding wheel, the old wooden gears and pulleys. The farmer inherited the property from his father and his father from his father. It was quite an adventure in time travel to be inside this mill. We lost light soon and had to leave.
Hey, Cindy,
Yes.
can you do me a quick favor and give me control back? I'm sorry, we have a couple people on that aren't part of the group.
Oh, okay. I'm not. Okay. Am I muted?
No, just if you could hit the little button at the top and give me control back.
Oh, sure. Is it the?
Should be like.
Oh yeah, the mute button.
No, it's like.
Oh.
It's I don't know what it's called. What's
Yeah, at this point, I think they have left. I don't
do
see
you
them
think
in
they
the room.
left? Because they're
Yeah.
cursing at me in chat now, in private.
Are
Oh.
they?
I don't know.
Are they mad at my presentation?
No, it's just probably some idiot that jumped on. Sorry.
So do you
So
need
go
a-
ahead, just keep going. I think they
Okay.
left.
Yeah,
All right.
I think we're good.
Okay.
I'm almost at the end here
No,
anyway.
you're great. Thank you.
All right, here's a greenhouse. They're always fascinating to shoot. Lots of textures in glass with leftover greens growing with abandon. This greenhouse attached to an abandoned asylum Oftentimes, large medical institutions were self-sufficient and had farms and greenhouses for their own food production. This is one such hothouse that once served the food needs of a former hospital. And I found this strange collection in another very large greenhouse facility. There was an administrative warehouse type building at the far end of the very large greenhouse complex. And it was obvious that someone lived there, but there was so much disturbing writing on the walls. Someone was very angry based on what I was reading. And I told my friends, I don't want to run into this person as we explored. So I walked into one of the smaller buildings and turned a corner and saw this and gasped. It made me jump a little, but I love it. Perhaps the occupant left this collection as a warning for us to leave immediately. I love to shoot abandoned churches, especially those with vaulted ceilings and stained glass. This church was so beautiful, and I walked up to the choir loft to get an expansive view. The problem, though, was that as I walked towards the front of the choir loft, the whole structure started to crack and dip, and I quickly moved back and shot it further back for safety measures. I'm not a fan of graffiti, but I find this artistry a nice contrast to what would be a blank wall behind the altar or just other repulsive graffiti. This church opened in 1899 and closed in 2002 when the steel industry greatly retracted, causing a mass population flight from the community, along with a diminishing number of parishioners. The carved pews of the church held the names of some parishioners. It was quite a blow to the community when this church closed, as multi-generations of families were bonded to this site when big steel entered this region in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This church was an extension of family, and it's quite destroyed now. There's no semblance of pews, windows, or chandeliers. This was a magnificent religious institution, and it's technically not a church. It was so difficult to access. It's quite beautiful and pristine inside, but we heard activity in a structure attached to the church, so I moved away from that area because my shutter is so very loud. This site reminded me of the cathedrals in Europe, thick stone walls and heavy leaded glass, arched windows and doorways. I do regret not bracketing my shots, though. Here's a view from a side hallway. It's beautiful arched doors. The windows are a bit blown out, and again, I regret not bracketing for this purpose. The second image is an opening to a far hallway, and even the window in the rear holds interesting design features. Schools are great for UE, and especially if they are recently closed and not vandalized. This Votech High School was loaded with good stuff. It was an enormous facility. This is a very interesting science lab. It was very difficult to get into the site, and I performed some crazy gymnastics that should not be a consideration for someone my age. It was another pain is good for the soul day for me. Here's a school library and its sad state of its book collection. This photo disturbs a lot of my social media followers. No one likes to see books unceremoniously strewn about, but this scene took this action to a new level. An old rural school in the woods and its lovely old auditorium.
That school looks like Marshall's face.
Who?
We have a harassing person on.
Oh, okay. How do I?
So you
No,
have to give me
don't worry about
control.
it. They're gone. They're going to come back later. So
Okay,
Okay.
just carry on. It's called Zoom bombing. It's the first time it's happened to us. Apologies.
it's all right. This was an old school in the woods and this lovely old auditorium. I was so pleased that it didn't have any destruction. It was abandoned for a while, but very pristine. Here's its bookcase I found. I love this bookcase. I wanted it. Lovely natural light. This is a thoroughly trashed swimming pool at a former resort. It's a mess, but it's interesting. I like the glow of the natural light through the one unboarded window. This facility was quite large too, but I never saw so much destruction. It was a mess. Here's an interesting artifact I found inside a whiskey distillery office building. It's a waged receipt from 1973. A supervisor made $3.80 an hour and got the same hourly wage for overtime work. This nursing home section of a huge hospital complex. It's a beautiful setting in the woods on top of a large hill. I was here twice, but the second time wasn't the charm because we got caught here and it wasn't a happy scene. but it had lovely natural lighting. This is the chapel for that hospital complex. It seems lost in the woods, but was only about 30 feet from one large building. Okay, this place made me shriek with laughter. A Honeymoon Hotel along a congested 6-lane highway. It's not in the Poconos, and it doesn't have beautiful views of woods or waterfalls. It has a view of the Wawa across the street. Each room had its own love theme, and there were mirrors everywhere. Of course, this is the heart room. It's so awful. Electrical hazards were everywhere too. There's a 2-person tub behind that bed, and it doesn't have any ground fault interrupters. I imagine water splashed on the bed too. It was so tacky. The whole place was tacky. Here's another theme room. I think it's supposed to be an aquarium. And there's police tape on the bed. I don't understand why, but it's interesting. But the mermaid featured on the wall, it's not a voyeur. At least she has her body turned away. Here's another honeymoon site, and it's very trashed. It's quite massive too, with acres and acres of buildings. The wedding bell pool holds a heart-shaped tub slightly peeking over the water line. It's a massive site. And here is a heart-shaped tub that either willfully removed itself from the tacky interior decor, or someone was crazy enough to drag it from the room. This was a fun site to explore, but some of the cottages on stilts on the slope property were not safe. They were ready to topple over. Plus the rooms were so trashed and broken mirrors were everywhere. It was like carpets made of mirror pieces. I found a few rooms with heart-shaped tubs still there, and their round beds were still intact, but there were so many of these heart tubs that were missing. So I don't understand where they went. Did people take them home? It was easy to squeeze through the fence of the site, but 2 days after our visit, there was a massive fire on the property. Obviously, arson occurred, and it's the way of many abandonments. Well, love is dead, I guess, and I will end it on that note and take your questions. So I guess I stop share.
Yeah.
All righty.
And we can make Sam the host again.
Yeah,
correct?
if you could make me the host. So you
Okay,
just-
let me
think-
get my slideshow out of here. Okay, and
I think if you click on the 3 dots on my
yes,
picture,
yes.
yeah,
And do I just
just make host.
Oh, I see. There we go. Okay, change
Awesome.
host.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. So anybody have questions? There were a few in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see, but you might have answered most of them. To go backwards, have you ever been discovered or confronted by police while
Yes.
on private property? How'd you handle it?
It's several times, but you just be extremely polite, and the older you are, the easier it is. You get a pass if you're my age. The younger you are, the more difficult time you will have. Usually they don't care because they realize you're just taking photos. They're looking for vandalism. But I'm not going to say that's a set in stone rule, but we've been confronted by police a couple times. And one time it was pretty scary. We were at that hospital, and we didn't know, we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there was a crime scene unfolding in the area. And so we were in an area where they were surveilling, and here we are rushing out of this facility, and we were surrounded by police cars with sirens and lights. And we were in 2 cars. My friend was across the street, and 2 were across the street, and I was in one. And I got the least questions. They just stay in the car. They asked me 2 questions. That was it. But my friend, who was young, the youngest person, he got the dressing down for a good half hour. And they just explained that there was a crime scene unfolding. They wanted to make sure that we weren't the people they were looking for. And it made it especially bad because somebody saw somebody with a red bag, and my camera bag is red. I since have gotten rid of that red bag. So it was not, they saw my red bag in the back seat of the car. But they let us go. They said, as long as you're not doing anything. And the other time we got caught in that tacky Honeymoon Hotel, and they were just very sweet cops, very nice. And they didn't understand what we were doing. Usually they don't understand what you're doing. They don't, why are you taking pictures of this stuff? And they said we'd have to leave, and we did, we said, of course. But they also told us where there were other abandonments in the area. So it's and sometimes security, private security personnel, it's never been a problem. You never ever, I don't think I highlighted that in my presentation. Maybe I did. You never break in. You never ever do that. If there's not an opening in a site, you just turn around and go. You either go through a window, a door, or through a fence, but you never make an opening. You never make a point of entry. So that's the difference between escalating an escalating situation. And if you're very polite to the police, they're fine. And the older you are, I always say, take an old person with you, because that's your get out of jail card.
Yeah. So a couple other things you touched.
I'll volunteer.
To go with us.
Yeah, we're not the profile.
Yeah. Another question was, have you ever encountered vagrants, graffiti artists, or crackheads?
Oh yes, that was the scariest thing I think I've encountered. We were in a school in DC. It's being demolished now. And it was a great school. And it was 4 levels, and we were on the 3rd level going up to the 4th level. And as we're walking up the steps, this terrible smell hit me hard. And it started to make me cough, and my eyes were watering, my eyes were burning, my throat was burning. And I said, what is that smell? And all of a sudden we heard a metal pipe drop. We heard something fall, and we realized somebody was upstairs. So my friend poked her head around the corner, and she's looking at this guy, and she turns around, she says, just go. So we're running down, and there's 2 staircases. So the guy went around to the other side and confronted us at the bottom, but there were 4 of us and 1 of him, but his pupils were the size of saucers, and it was, and so I went on the way home, I was Googling, what does a meth lab smell like? and it was exactly what I was smelling.
Wow.
So I was and as we were leaving the facility, these giant men, 2 giant, they must have been 7 foot tall, or they were like 6'5", 6'7". They were huge. And they're coming in as we're going out. I thought, oh my God, what are we doing? And I was shaking. And my friend wanted a photo on the 4th floor. She wanted to go back in. I said, we are not going back in. We are not doing it. And she pouted for weeks because I wouldn't go back with her. But she found somebody to take her back. And I just refused to go back to that place.
That's awesome. Next question. Let me see if I can scroll up. One was, I think you talked about a little bit, but have you ever been confronted by police
Yeah.
while shooting, and how did you handle it?
What was the question again?
And how did you handle it if you've ever been confronted by police?
2 questions. What are you doing? And what are you doing in there? And why are you out of state?
Mhm.
And you don't lie.
Yeah.
The one thing, if they don't see us coming out of a building, I'm not going to volunteer that information.
Right.
Because the thing I noticed, my friend was across the street, and I didn't tell them we were in the building. We just drove out, and that's when they caught us. And but I see her going into the car. She got out of the car. I stayed in the car, but she was talking to there were young police across the street. I had the old ones on my side, and she was going in the car, and she got her camera. She's showing the police her monitor, and I couldn't believe it. She was showing off her photos. that, and I got a little irritated with her. I said, don't do that. I said, don't volunteer information that, you know, be honest, but don't give them information.
Right.
So you don't lie, but you just taking photos. And I mean, it's possible I know somebody that did get cited for trespassing, but I do research before I go to these places. If I see a lot of arrests for trespassing or whatever on sites, I just stay away. Now that place, that hospital, that would have been a really high risk place. I really was hesitant to go there, but it was my friend's birthday and she made me feel bad if I didn't go.
Yeah. Very fun. Let's see if there's any other questions. You've already answered a lot of these that people were asking, like, one was, do you lead groups?
Yes, I'm a host of a meetup group, but we haven't done anything in a long time because of COVID. My friend and I were talking about doing workshops, but I don't know if that's gonna work out, but I do sometimes for meetups and a meetup, and it's just a very difficult time right now with this COVID thing. There's nothing going on. I'm mostly going out with my little herd group. 4 of us, we go out because we're together all the time, so I think we're pretty safe. But I'm probably gonna ease back a lot now because everything's getting a little more dangerous with the virus. It's mutating, and till I get the vaccine, I don't know if I want to be risking it. I don't want to get sick before I get the vaccine when it's so close.
Yeah. Another question was just about safety gear. You talked about good boots and things, but the other things to always have.
Yeah, a good hint is to carry wet wipes in your camera bag. You need that more than you realize because you're in areas where there are no facilities. So, you know, and you get really dirty. I'm always filthy when I go exploring. But yeah, safety, black. I wear black. Although this is my outfit that I usually wear when I explore. Dark clothes and jeans. I don't want to have. You want heavy. You want your limbs covered. My friend wears shorts and she's dumb to do that in the summer. And sandals. You don't want to wear sandals because you're.
Good Lord, though.
Yeah, but she does that. And water, take water, always water. A couple times I didn't take enough and it was very brutal. And flashlights, you must have a flashlight. I now take 2 because if one dies, you have another one. I always take extra batteries too. One thing, it's really dark inside abandonments and you got to see where you're stepping because it's dangerous. It's really dangerous. And you have to be careful of, you know, the people in the buildings. It's, you don't want to run into people. And a lot of abandonments are not in safe neighborhoods. So you have to be really careful of that too. And you have to be looking around at everything. And I mean, I'm nervous getting in. That's I'm extremely nervous till I get inside and then I listen. And if it seems quiet, then I'm okay. But it's just getting in is the hardest part for me. Driving up to the place, I start getting a little panicky.
Oh yeah. Okay, any other major questions? We had one was saying how many people normally go with you. You were saying not to go alone.
Yeah, we usually go in a group of 4, sometimes 5. You don't want to have too many people. If you have the more people, the more exposure, and it's just it just brings too much attention. But I don't like to. I sometimes go with my friend. It's just 2 of us, but I prefer going with a group of 4. I feel safe, and you want to stick with your group. A couple times I separate from it. You get so involved in your photography that you wander away, and then I start to panic when I can't hear them. So you want to stay with your group, but not a group that's too big keep it on the small side, but 4 is a good number, a real good number. Because if you fall, you need somebody to help you up or get hurt, and
Yeah,
yeah,
good point.
yeah.
Yeah,
And your phone doesn't always work.
right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
If there are any
sure.
other questions, people can come off mute and ask your question if there's anything else.
Yeah, if anybody has anything, I'm glad to answer.
So there's one more question about
Sure.
pepper spray. Did we talk about that one?
Oh, no, I didn't see that one.
I don't take pepper spray. I don't think it's a bad idea. I just don't carry too much with me. I like to, and I'm a klutz. I'm just a klutz. I'm afraid I'm going to pepper spray myself. But it's not a bad idea, especially for if you run into animals and abandonments. Usually it's vultures. I hear or
Two-legged or winged?
excuse me.
Two-legged or winged?
But it's not a bad idea to take pepper spray. But I don't carry it. I probably should. And dust, dust masks too. Or I don't wear respirators. I should. And now that we're all wearing masks, I'm very used to it. So I probably should start wearing them inside abandonments too. But only occasionally I'll wear one if the mold is really bad. Sometimes black mold it's really dangerous. So I mean, you should wear one, but I don't. It's not smart. But you know what? I'm not young, so.
Just have it just in case.
Yeah, I always carry one with me. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And now you have to carry because you're always wearing one wherever you go. So
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. If there's no other questions, we can wrap up. And
all right.
I appreciate your time so much.
Sure.
Great. And thank you for sharing.
Oh, sure.
With, just places people can go because
yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Start if you want to get into it. That's a good place to start.
Okay. Yep. Sounds
right.
good. All right. Thanks again. Oh, and did you want to say something really fast about your books? Like, where can people find?
Oh, okay. Yeah. They're all on Amazon under Cindy Vasko. You just have to search my name, Cindy Vasko, and my author's page will come up. I have 8 listed there now. 9 actually. 9 one's pre-order. So they're all there, and I have them on my website too. My website is just cindyvasco.com.
Okay.
It's a lot of updating, but it's still there.
Yeah. Well, I'll post some links on our Facebook or private.
All right.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye.